good to see you all again. So today is the last day before the multiple choice exam on Sunday, and we will go through the toolbox together with you this morning. We've made this plan, so the toolbox wrap up will be now until about 10:30, and then there will be a presentation by one of your colleague, a fellow student, Christian Bang Olsen, not Olofsen, but Olsen. He's the coordinator of Venture Cup, and he's asked me if it was okay with us that he could come and present what Venture Cup is about. So he will make a small presentation at 10:30, and then from 10:45, then we will have not discussion, but I know that some of you have some frustrations about the date on Sunday. But anyway, a lot of information about the exam on Sunday, and then you have the options to ask us as many questions as you want, and we will try to give you the best answers that we can give you. That will be at 10:45. And then at 1 o'clock there's group work in 450, where you will go through the 4 cases and work on them, and spend the afternoon with whatever you need to focus on to be prepared for Sunday, together with the TAs. Yes? So Kasper, he will start.
Okay. Welcome. As always, any questions, please raise your hand or just start yelling, and now see if we can get a microphone around. If that doesn't work, I'll repeat the question, so if anyone is listening on the other side of the camera, just ask. So, it's about the toolbox. The toolbox is sort of an addition to the curriculum, and it's a collection of all these models and stuff we have. So the first part is, why do we organize? We've been through some of that already. So basically, organizational performance, we divide into 2 axes. We have the efficiency axis, and we have effectiveness. And we want to have both as best as possible. So efficiency is mainly about doing things right. That is, you use the least amount of resources to produce a given good. Effectiveness, that's a different measure. That's about doing the right things. So in a given situation, how do you act upon the market? Are you doing the right things to reach your customers or your clients? So that's sort of the matrix that you can walk in and use as a tool to understand your strategy. As always, please, questions, comments, anything. But it's a good way of looking at how your organization is performing. And often we sort of mix the 2 things, and that gives rise to all sorts of problems. But basically, efficiency, that's the economic term. Effectiveness, that is how we're actually doing things and then reaching our goals. When we look at management, we basically talk about 4 functions of management. Looks pretty simple. We start by planning, which is choosing the appropriate goals, where we want to go, how we want to do it. Then we organize who's going to do what, how they're going to do it, in which order, who's reporting to who. And then you step in as a manager or leader. You start leading. You made a plan, you're organized. Now we have to get people to actually do the jobs. So we lead by example, we coordinate, we try to energize individuals, we try to make people do their actual jobs. And sometimes that requires a lot of following up, that requires a lot of sending out emails, it requires a lot of stuff. It's leading, it's going in front of people, making them work in your organization. Then, having done that, it's back to controlling. I mean, it's a good thing that you trust people, but sometimes at a level of control is actually quite nice, making sure that people have performed the task that they're supposed to do. So checking up on stuff, making sure that people are doing the things that they are reporting in the way that you ask, that they're actually performing the task that they're supposed to do. So that's the 4 functions of management, and it's sort of an iterative process, goes round and around again, planning, organizing, leading, controlling, and back forth again. Sometimes changes happen, and we go back to replanning. We reorganize. Things didn't work out quite the way we expected, so we changed it again. We go back and we lead again. And that leads us to the 4 building blocks. We've been through some of this before, but this is about the competitive advantage. Basically, there are a number of building blocks that we want to use for creating competitive advantage. We want to be efficient as possible, of course. That ties back to the efficiency effectiveness matrix. And we want speed and flexibility and innovation, of course. Innovation is that coming up with new ideas, implementing new products, making these products reach the market. That is the source of innovation. That is the idea behind innovation. Yeah?
Just a quick question. Now I think on TEMO DK there are some questions for each lesson. I think they're quite outdated, some of them. But one of them actually has what are the building blocks of competitive advantage, etc. And one of the wrong options is actually effectiveness, which is weird to me because effectiveness is both responsiveness to customers and innovation and what have you. So I would just ask if there's a reason effectiveness is not there, or it is because it is included in the other options.
Actually, it's a good question. I haven't really looked into that, because effectiveness, as you say, is about doing the right things. When this is from Porter's competitive advantage, and this is where efficiency is often a main building driver, a main driver. So perhaps we have to look into those TEMO DK things again. But responsiveness to customers is also about being effective. It's about what is it that the customers actually want. It's about listening to your customers and making a plan that actually meets the customers at the right place. And of course, quality. Quality is a specific issue, because quality is about what does the customer expect. It's not about what you perceive as good quality. I think we touched upon the VHS Betamax case, old video types. In the old days, I was sort of a video fanatic, and now, of course, I chose Betamax because that had the superior quality. It had a better level of red, it had a higher signal-to-noise ratio, good things for an engineer, but there wasn't really a lot of content on that format because the customers demanded something different. So customer quality is not what you as an engineer expect. Quality is what the customer perceives as the right quality. And you as an engineer has to translate that and get back to say, well, there might be something about the noise signal-to-noise ratio, but the customers require something different. So it's about what the customers define as quality that we have to come up with. Yep.
Can you think of a case that you work with now, one of the 4 cases, where this is actually one of the things that they discuss or is an issue? Yeah, that's it. Yep, you. With a black t-shirt? Yeah. Could you elaborate a bit about it?
Well, they say like customers don't like or don't care about if it's fried or boiled, splitting, and they say like they don't care about the quality in itself. So if it's like proper Chinese food or not, so the company doesn't go in that direction to increase like proper preparation of the dishes.
No, and why don't they do that?
Since they don't feel the need to, since customers seem to not care about it.
Yeah, and that's where you have the link between the quality and the responsiveness. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Because it's a common pitfall exactly in that case to go out and discuss your perception of quality, not what the customers want. We want specific quality, but the customers want something else. So why should we spend a lot of money on delivering this particular kind of quality that the customers actually don't want to pay for? When we look at an organization, we simply divide it into 3 levels. There's the operational level or the functional level in the bottom. That's where we actually do the work. That's where we have the first line manager. This is where things happen and where you should focus your attention. There's the tactical level, business level, and of course there's the strategic level. And often when we do the analysis, we have a tendency, as Bort told us from Novo, we go in and look at the strategic level. And we also look into how to organize and design the organization. What are the building blocks? What are the things? Who reports to? Instead of actually focusing on the functional and operational level, where it's about management, where it's about the interaction between people. And it's a common fallacy because it's interesting to change structure. And most of the literature we read is about structure. But where the things actually happen is at the bottom. So a lot of changes we induce, we might hold back a bit and say, well, perhaps we should actually focus on management, we should focus on projects, on processes, and take a look at how we actually perform these tasks. but it's just a simple way that we organize and understand an organization. This is going to fall down. In the toolbox, we use the SWOT analysis. Yeah.
A lot of times we have difficulty distinguishing clearly between the corporate level and the business level, especially when we work with smaller companies.
Sorry, you have a distinguishment between the business and the corporate level?
Yes, when we work with smaller companies.
Yes.
Can you clearly set it up so?
No. Because usually this maps very well onto a big company. As soon as you have a small company, a lot of the functions that we divide in and we use in the big companies, they map onto the same person. So he may actually be on the operational level, he may actually take decisions on the tactical or business level, and he also takes strategic decisions. So it's really in smaller, medium-sized companies, it often becomes a mess, and you have to argue which level are we actually looking at. Should we decide that it's, or should we analyze this as a business level or a strategic level? Yeah.
So a question about the actual names of the levels, all the different kinds of management, because in contemporary management it mentions something it calls organizational planning, where it has 3 levels as well, but those are actually quite different from here, except they're called the same, where the business level is also called the division level, and it's something different from what is mentioned here. So is it fine to call both corporate, business and functional levels just from organizational level and organizational planning, or is there another distinction?
The best thing is that you have, as you say, distinctions, and if you go into a different strand of literature that you might use in your report, you might actually get different definitions. So use a reference. When I talk about, or when I do the analysis on organizational level, this is my perception. Then there's complete clarity for the reader. Because we're going to give this, of course, to a censor. They're going to go through it and say, well, okay, I understand. So that's the easiest.
In the multiple choice test, we, of course, have only one model that we test in each question. So there will not be a mix. And if there's a mix, it's because we want to trick you and make sure that you actually know the difference between the 2 models. So, yeah, just to say that we also work with a very strong focus on which model that we work with.
So back to the SWOT analysis. In the toolbox, we use it for 2 things. And here, we use it as a situational analysis. It's a different way of sort of expanding the SWOT analysis. Instead of, you usually have a 2x2 matrix. But here, you use it as a situational analysis, and you go into the internal parts, of course, strengths and weaknesses, and the external analysis, again, opportunities and threats. That's the usual part we do. And you create a SWOT profile. And we map that onto the different strategic levels. Is it corporate strategic level, or the business level, or the functional level? So we look at what are we actually good at internally, and we compare that to what are the external factors. And the SWOT analysis is crude. It doesn't provide a specific logic to test these things, but it's efficient. It's a good tool to actually weigh up what are we good at and what are the external factors. It's been used so much, and it's still being used because it does provide us with insight. There's no sort of stringent approach for coming from getting the information to doing the analysis. That's where you come in as engineers, and you say, well, we see these functions and we see these things that we're very good at in this particular situation, and the market has these threats, and we try to link this. So there's some sort of, it's allowed to be a bit creative when you do the SWOT analysis. Just use a bit of argument. Anytime there's something about an organization, there are some stakeholders. Stakeholders are interesting because we have to be very, very careful about them. As you know, we have an exam on Sunday, and someone has been complaining, and there's been a lot of bickering back and forth. Should it be on Sunday? And oh, we hate that. Of course, we would like it to be on a Wednesday. So when we started the semester, we had, of course, stakeholders. One of the stakeholders was the student administration in 101. They were quite content in the beginning, so they were satisfied. They had a lot of influence because they weren't able to set the date for the exam. They had a lot of influence, but they didn't have a lot of interest. So we placed them in this area. Suddenly, one of these complaints come up. And administrative people, they don't like complaints, so they start to get shaky. Oh, this is going to be really dangerous. We don't like a case in the student union. They start almost crying. I'm just kidding you. But suddenly, they change from having low interest to having a very high interest in this. Lots of mails going around, and we have to manage that closely. Of course, we can't manage them because they have obviously a lot of power. So they wanted to change the date, and they wanted to change a lot of things, but it wasn't really possible given the circumstances. But it's just an example of how you can use this influence interest grid. And we really, looking forward, have to manage this student administration in 101 and make sure that they actually have the interest and they're informed all the time. So it's a good model. Have anyone you worked in healthcare, in hospitals, for instance? Usually there's a lot of senior doctors. And senior doctors, they might go about doing their business, showing that they don't really care about these changes that goes on. But the thing is that many of them have a lot of influence. And if you don't, as a consultant, spot who are the actual influential parties, then you might end up in that situation that these are going to block your project. And you might call it managed closely. When I do projects in healthcare, I talk about taking hostages. You immediately in the beginning of the project map out who has a potential high interest. They don't show it yet, but they might be affected, which means I map them into the high interest area. And if they have a lot of influence, I make sure that they are included into the project. And I make sure that they have a lot of say. Yeah?
Can you give me some examples, especially for the keep satisfied and keep informed?
The keep informed and keep satisfied. Well, in the beginning of this, of the discussion with 101 about the exam, they were just to be kept satisfied in the sense that we just give them information about what's going on. But as soon as they change their interest, they go from keep satisfied to manage closely. But the thing is, if they have influence, they might not reveal their interest. So this is quite actually the tricky part. When do they move from keep satisfied to manage closely? I always take a precautionary review and say, well, perhaps we should start by making sure that we manage them closely if they have high influence. Because you don't know over the course of a change project if they might switch from interest low to interest high. And the keep satisfied also very difficult just to know, are they actually kept satisfied? So include those very high influence stakeholders in the project, the most influential stakeholders, and make sure that they are becoming interested in the project. You get the difference? Yeah.
A very easy example for keeping informed as well is actually us students. We don't really have any influence over the course, but we are very interested in knowing where the lectures are and stuff. So I guess that's a good example.
Another example of keeping informed is when you do change in a big department, you typically work with a project group. But there's a lot of people who will be influenced by the changes. They have no influence. They have no power. But you have to keep them informed. Otherwise, they're not going to follow up on your change. There's nothing worse than people say, well, we didn't know about that. We weren't informed. Nothing happened. And then suddenly it's going to be a big surprise for them that the change is going to happen. And they turn from being just keep informed and not doing what they're supposed to do to perhaps create a coalition. And when they create a coalition, they turn from an individual with no influence to a group with high influence. And that's when things are going to get messy. Then you have to tackle this group, and it usually turns into a political discussion. Yeah, it's going to be later.
Yeah.
So, this one, the 9 building blocks, the canvas. This is good. It's basically about understanding the value proposition. We have these 9 easy building blocks. We have a value proposition, and we try to map that value proposition to our customers. And if we can map these 2 things, we may have a product. So, doing the value proposition, we create a relationship with our customer through some channels. We might communicate with them on Twitter, we might meet them in a store, and we might also decide how do we want to distribute this. Should we sell it through a shop, or should we sell it to anything? But that's the channel discussion, or the decision we have to make. In doing so, we also choose, should we do one sale or many sales, or what is the source of revenue? In the book, there's this nice example of Nestlé, who pushes out these Nespresso machines. Sell them cheap, almost shove them down the throat of the customers. Now they have this, actually made a small investment, nice. And then they have to go out and buy coffee. But you can only buy coffee through them. It's going to be expensive coffee. But to the customer, it's still a relatively small cost compared to the investment you just made in the machine. So you might not make a lot of money on selling the machines, but you made a huge amount of money on the recurring sales from selling coffee. Excellent business model. Sell once, buy many. On the other side, we have, what are the activities we do? Nestlé's activity is not producing machines. It's selling coffee. So they might outsource all this machine-producing facilities and machine-producing business to someone else. As long as we have good machines at a relatively cheap cost, we're going to make money on the other business. And there might be some resources. Of course, we could go into, if we were Nestlé, it's interesting to have a patent on the actual, the things that you put the coffee in. That's the way you set up a fence to make sure that people are not going to encroach on your market. So one of the resources is that having patents. Perhaps designing good machines that looks good, and then outsource that production. And that's also why we have the partners. Where do we sell this stuff? How do we engage partners? And lastly, what are the costs of doing this? I really like the coffee business model. Have this very, very cheap product. You can buy coffee beans for yourself, but you still choose, and many people still choose, to make this nice coffee, which are 20 or 50 times more expensive. Interesting. A lot of money to be made. The thing is that another step in building the business model is actually mapping the customer's need to the design or the value proposition. And this is one way of looking at it. On the left side, we actually take these 2 parts of the business model and sort of zoom in. So on one side, we have the customer and we have the value proposition. The customer has something the customer wants to get done. I have some jobs I need to do. I need to go shopping. I need to make coffee. I need to do something. And then as a customer, there's some pains. I hate lousy coffee. And also I hate the time it takes to brew a good coffee cup. Perhaps I should go to Starbucks, but it takes too much time and it's not on my corner. So the customer has some pains. But there's also some gains. I like this nice taste. There's something that I want from doing this. And our job as engineers and sales guys is that we have to map this. The pain relievers should be mapped to the pains the customer have. The products and services should be mapped to the jobs that the customer wants to get done. And of course, the gain creators, that extra little thing, should be mapped to the gains that the customer wants. If we can make a match, if we can map these 2 together, then suddenly we have something that the customer wants. And then we have to, of course, calculate, is it actually a viable business? Should I sell 10 or 10,000, or how many should I sell? If I sell super high-end luxury cars, then perhaps it's just good enough to make 10 examples or 10 models of the car. No more, no less. Then it also becomes exclusive. There's a Danish producer of supercars called TEMO. It's 1,100 horsepower car, really fast. It had a bit of a bumpy ride in the media, but it's an interesting case because they only want to make 15 of the car. Of course, they're going to sell it hugely expensive, but 15, that's enough for the business model to make sense. And they're going to make a lot of money on this. just because it's exclusive, just because there's 15 of them. But that's sort of the model that many of the high-end cars make now. We're going to make this super-duper car, but we're only going to produce 10. And perhaps we're going to sell it on an auction to make sure that we get an obscene amount of money for each of them. The other end of the scale is that we're just going to sell coffee. Yeah. Question.
I have a question to the gains.
Yeah.
Is it what the extra things that the customer wants, or is it the extra things that they get from the product?
It's the extra thing that the customer wants, and we have to make sure that the things that we do are the things that the customer want. So we have to map the things that we do to the customer gains.
But then how do you distinguish between the pains? Because that's also what they want.
It's a subtle distinction in the sense that there are something that irritates me. Something takes time. It's inconvenient. I wouldn't like that. Going shopping is inconvenient for me. But I still like to get ecologic and organic food. So a gain for me would be organic food, but a pain is actually buying the stuff. So what can I do? I might do an ecologic, organic super sales thing that runs around and delivers it at your doorstep. So immediately I had the gain that you get the organic food, but also relieve the pain that you don't have to go down to the grocery shop and stand in a line and get it. So, but it's a subtle distinction. When do we actually have a gain and when do we have a pain? It's sort of what irritates you and what do I want instead. Yeah.
Is considered spending money also a pain?
It depends on your personal preference. I know some people, including my daughters, who think spending money is really a good thing, especially when it's not their money. So, was there a question up there? Okay. But it's really just mapping these two sides. And often we forget the customer when we create a product. We forget what is it that we actually want to give the customer, because, and perhaps that's sort of an engineering thing. We get caught up in features, performance stuff, and well, this is really exciting. Oh shit, no one wants it. So there has to be a customer in the end who's going to benefit from the value proposition that you make. If we look at sort of the overall strategic thing, you might argue that there are actually only two major strategies. One is that you go for cost, meaning low cost, you compete on cost. On the other end of the scale is that you differentiate yourself. You do something different. It might not be very, very different, but it's just different enough that the customer perceives that it's different. If it's different, then it becomes valuable and you might be interested in paying that little bit extra that gives you a profit advantage. This doesn't mean that you should always go for cost. You might have economies of scale. You might have nice factor costs, really low factor costs. You might have some nice cost drivers that allows you to deliver a super cheap product. But if you don't have if you don't have competitors and you're really differentiating yourself, why should you want to deliver something at a low cost? Why not just turn up the cost and make a super normal profit for a long time? Is that a question? Yeah.
A lot of literature states that this high differentiation and low costs actually doesn't exist. Maybe due to the reason you just mentioned, but it is impossible. The theory says to focus on both cost reduction and differentiation at the same time because it's each other's opposite. Do you agree with that, or?
You could probably come up with a situation where you differentiate yourself a lot because no one else thought about that. But in the same sense, if no one else thought about that, then you're in a market of one. And then you're in price competition with yourself. So in that sense, you would be excluding yourself from being cost differentiating. Yeah.
Are the axes actually in relation to your competitors?
Yes.
But then I don't get the fact, like if you have higher costs than your competitors,
yeah.
And instead states in the second and third thing that you have a superior product, but it's not necessarily more expensive than in the other ones, because there it says like you have lower cost than your competitors, but in the right column you don't have that. But that would be actually the case, wouldn't it?
Could you will pretty fast. You said, repeat it please slowly.
Okay. So the right column also means that you have a higher price than your competitors.
No, not necessarily. If you have a high cost and a low price, then you're operating at a loss. In the airline industry, some companies have been operating at a loss for a long time. And then you go into a competition, who has the most money in the bank before someone gets bankrupt?
Yeah, okay, but then I don't get the fact that it states in the left column that you have lower cost than your competitors. And in the right, is it relative or absolute?
It's relative. If you want to compare with your customer to your competitors, then it's relative to your competitors. It's difficult to argue about if you're on the market of one. Do I have a higher low cost? How should I compare that to what? Well, I have these nice processes which are very expensive, but I can't compare that to anyone. So in the end, it's going to map on to the price that you can deliver your goods to. And if you have a competitor who has a different cost structure than you, which are lower, then they're able to actually deliver it at a lower price and still make money. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So this is a question to the low cost, and it determines and all the text in the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, what is industry-specific cost drivers or idiosyncratic costs?
An industry-specific cost driver would be, for instance, in the the mobile phone industry, they use rare earth minerals. And that's very specific to that industry. So if you're in that industry, you have to account for those costs going up. And someone who's going to think long, buy a share of Chinese have been doing that to monopolize a future market of rare earth minerals. Cost-specific drivers in the airline industry would be fuel costs. Some companies, they like to think long-term, so they bet on future fuel costs. And sometimes they bet with the market, sometimes they bet against the market. SAS was in a position a few years ago that they bet wrongly, and cost of fuel went up, and they had to suffer for that. Instead of hedging and thinking long-term, they didn't do that. They thought short-term and lost on it. Yeah?
The numbers in the corners, does that mean that the one is the best and the four is the
No.
best? Okay.
It's depending on your competitive situation. Of course, it's nice to have a superior product where you can have a high price and high level of differentiation. But if you can have high level of differentiation and still do it at a low cost, you could argue that Apple might be one of the companies that had a relatively low cost, but they differentiate themselves high, so they have a supernormal profit margin, which is probably the best place you can be. Low cost, high differentiation. So any company that has a lot of patents might position themselves in a high differentiation. Medical companies who have a few years to live on their patents, they can set up a production system, which is relatively cheap. Of course, they still have to pay off the investment in the patent, but the direct cost structure is low, and you differentiate yourself very highly because no one else is going to deliver that particular molecule. So you're going to sell it exceedingly expensive. You want to live? You don't want to live? How much you want to pay? Yeah.
Yeah, when you say cost, is it for the customer or is it for the company?
Price is for the cost for the customer. Cost is the production cost.
This is the production cost.
Yes. That's why we have low cost determinant, which is economies of scale, for instance. If you have...
I wouldn't put Apple where you put it. Right.
Sorry?
If it's the other way around, I wouldn't put Apple.
Why would you put
in
Apple?
the box. If it's the other way around, I would put Apple in the second quadrant.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's probably in the...
Well, we agree on
first
Apple have
quadrant,
a high level of differentiation because they're one delivering the iPhone. Then we can discuss, do they have a high low cost structure? They, in relative sense, they have a low cost structure because they're able to sell it at almost 3 times the price of production. That's quite nice. And we still do it. Yeah. But differentiation, that's about features, reputation, anything. We might have 2 completely identical functional products, but we differentiate ourselves with an image, with a name, with a brand. I'm standing in a shop with 2 boxes. One says Louis Vuitton, one says something else. And for reasons unknown, my daughters are sort of attracted to this Louis Vuitton thing and they can't get it out of their mind. They're completely identical as an engineer. I said, well, that'll hold 3 gallons and that'll hold 3 gallons, so same shit to me. But it's super highly differentiated. It symbolizes something else. So there's different ways of doing this differentiation. Nope. So another another tool in the toolbox is what we call the resource analysis. It's about assessing potential resources in the company. This is an example of a resource. This is hydrostatic shaping. It's a technology where you take one piece of sheet metal and then you shape it and stamp it and tamp it and shape it, and you actually turn it into a valve. The thing about this production is that there are no rough edges. So it's really, really good to use in food industry because no rough edges translates into easy to maintain, easy to clean, less bacteria, less problems. And for those of you who know a little bit about production, this is an orbital laser welding machine. So nice. It also makes no seams. So we have a product here which is really good, for instance, in Denmark, where we have a lot of milk. This is actually a valve battery used in the milking industry. So this is a particular resource. Hydrostatic shaping is a particular resource. And we can map that onto the resource analysis, because not many people around the world can do hydrostatic shaping. This process of going from here to there, it's really, really difficult. It's not something that you can just calculate. It takes a lot of years of practice because every time you bend and you press the material, it gets thinner. And there's some sort of tacit knowledge about where does the material get thinner and when does it get too thin that you can't actually bend it or shape it again. So there's some knowledge here that's difficult to translate. And actually the company that produces the valves are not the company that has a hydrostatic shaping machine. It's a small company with experts. And they sit on the market and they guard it carefully. So it's really a rare resource. The valve making company has been trying to do it themselves. They've failed miserably. They tried to come up and find competitors and invest in them just to make a competitive situation. They failed miserably. So this resource is really valuable. It provides the customer with something special. It's rare. They are the only one who has that in Denmark, and they're really good at that particular situation. Can you imitate it? Yes, you could perhaps come up with something that could do almost the same, but it's difficult to do. It's going to be more expensive, and it's going to be more post-treatment. So it's quite difficult to just imitate. Could we substitute to something else? No, not readily. They tried. They tried to come up with solution, different materials, another way of doing the valves. No success yet. So they're sort of in the pocket, this big valve producing company, they're sort of in the pocket of a small company. They just want their cut of the deal. And can they appropriate it? Basically, it means, can we make money from this resource? Yes, they can. And they do it. And every time the big company has to sell valves, the small company says, well, we're just going to need our 25% of the deal. They're not that greedy, actually. So they made a good business. And in that sense, they end up in a sustainable competitive advantage position. It might not last them 20 years. There might come some new technology. Of course, they know that the big company is continually investing in learning. They have PhDs, they have all sorts of stuff. But for the time being, for foreseeable future, 5 years, they have sustainable competitive advantage. So the resource analysis is actually a nice tool, but the only thing you have to be aware of that it's a resource in the company that you map onto something that the customer can use. This product familiarity matrix is also a nice tool. Have you used that in some of the cases? It tells us something about what do we know as a company about a technology. Is it familiar? Is it unfamiliar? And the market that we're moving into, is that familiar? Is it unfamiliar? Could you come up with a case, one of those that we've been looking at, where this maps on almost perfectly? Yeah.
The milk fuzz case.
Yeah.
Where they have to decide if they want to move into the wine market, which the company knows nothing about.
Yeah, exactly. So they know about the technology, to some extent at least. There might be some differences, but the base technology, they know. They're very familiar with that. But the market, It's completely different market compared to the Danish milk market. They don't have one actor they have to deal with. They have perhaps a lot of wine producers they have to deal with. So very different. And that means that, of course, we need some sort of internal development, but we also need a strategic collaboration. Don't go into this market on your own because you're likely to burn your fingers. You're likely to move into an area where you don't know anything about what's going on. That's usually not very good for anyone. So back to the canvas, business canvas. This is the basic level. When you understand the 9 building blocks and you build your business model, this is the mechanics of a business model. Oh, money goes in here, it's delivered to the customers there, we have these resources. So a company may have a lot of these. But at an aggregated level, there's also some patterns here. Not patents, but patterns. And in this, about the business model, we distinguish between 5 types of business model patterns. One is that unbundling. The idea of unbundling is that sometimes we have businesses which are basically 3 different businesses tied into one. So there's customer relationship management, there's product innovation, and there's infrastructure management. Telco companies, telephone companies seem to be one of those areas. At least they have a lot of infrastructure. They have some sort of business product innovation. They come up with new ideas, at least, try to deliver faster speeds and stuff. And they have a lot of customer relation management. So the idea in this book is that perhaps you should unbundle this, because there's 3 different things you have to focus on, and it might actually be better to switch and unbundle this. So you have one part of your business, or sell it off, where you only focus on infrastructure, and then we can focus on innovation or customer relation management in your 3rd business. Of course, it's not always just unbundling, because if you look at the Danish telephone providers, just like Tele Denmark, they sort of sit on the infrastructure. Of course, they diverted that into one specific unit, but they also take content in. So if you buy one of their packages, you always also get TDC Play, which is a lot of content. And I think they perceive that as giving them a competitive advantage. They negotiated some good deals which allows people to use TDC Play. Then you don't have to buy Spotify, you don't have to do that. It's available for your family. So they make a case that you get a good deal. So they wouldn't perceive it as a good idea to unbundle. Some of it they would actually prefer to keep together. Another pattern is the long tail. An example could be Amazon, where you have a few products which you sell a lot of. And the usual idea in production is that we would like most of our products to be here, and we don't like as much of the long tail where we have many, many products where we don't sell a lot. If they sit there on the shelf, they're going to decay, and we're not going to be able to sell them, and it's going to be a loss. So usually we want to move up and have as much as possible. But the long tail idea is that you have a big market, and you're able to satisfy a big market by actually delivering a lot of specific things to specific clients. So you don't sell a lot here, but you sell some, and perhaps you can actually make a profit from this by having perhaps a higher price. The 3rd model is the multi-sided platform, Android, iOS, anywhere where we let people meet 2 sides of a market meet. You have someone who develops software, and you have a platform which you control, and you have buyers and users of platform, users of software. You meet on that platform. Of course, if you know if you own the platform, you take a cut from both parties. Nice, nice, nice. And there's a freemium platform, the freemium pattern. The idea is that you have a product, and one part of the customers get something for free. It's like the free newspaper. It's like giving away a part of the product or luring people in, the bait and hook. Most of us know that from software. We buy something and we download, and there's in-app purchases. So what looked like a good deal in the beginning, you end up paying a lot because, I need that extra thing, and I can't even print. Now I'm going to buy that. So that's the sort of the bait and hook. But the idea is that you give something for free, you lure the people in. Yeah.
That there could be some overlapping factors from the different model patterns, where now you mentioned TDC, where I would say, you could also argue that they give something away for free to keep their customers. so they could both go on free.
It's not a neither nor.
Unbundling, so.
Yeah. You're right, it's not a neither nor. These are just archetypes to make clear that there are some patterns that you can use. But in reality, it's a mix of different things where you have some sort of unbundling and you give away something for free to lure people in, and perhaps you even make a market inside that so you can get someone who also pays from the other side. So it's just a way that you see that there are different options of viewing this. And the last one is that you have some part of your business process. Yeah?
You said that TDC Play, it would be a bad idea for TDC to unbundle, but...
No, I didn't say it would be a bad idea, but I say they would probably think it's a bad idea because they perceive it as extra value that they add TDC Play. So they add content as well, where basically they may be an infrastructure company, but continue.
Thought that it would be a good idea because they could still get the advantage, but it's two different kinds of products they are producing, so maybe it's a good idea to use different business models of the two.
They probably use different business models, but when we unbundle, if we have 3 businesses in one bundle, then you charge the customer once. If you unbundle this, that means you actually have to make the customer pay 3 times for each of these individual services. And then it may be difficult for TDC to argue that you get TDC Play. Why should I pay to get TDC Play? It's an added service, but what's the value of the added service? Right now, it makes sense because you get it as part of something else.
In the example of the book, it's a phone company that unbundles.
Yeah.
And they outsource the customer relations, but actually they are still a part of what you get when you buy the abonnement. So I don't get why it's unbundled there and it cannot be unbundled here.
It can be. I'm just saying that the idea of having this extra service only in some cases makes sense if it's bundled with something else. And I would argue for TDC, they perceive that this TDC Play is an added value. I'm not sure that it is an added value, but if you have to choose between, I'm going to get TDC, I'm going to get a nice internet connection. So when I make the calculation, what is a good price for me, then what would the individual cost of the TDC Play be compared to if I buy another service? Might that service be even better at a lower cost? So that's a customer's perspective that you have to look at before you decide, should I bundle or should I unbundle? I'm just saying that it's not always that clear cut that you should unbundle. There might be reasons why you bundle stuff.
Yeah. You get the customer service as part of when you buy the product.
Yeah.
So it's not too different. You don't pay extra for the customer service.
Okay.
No.
Yeah.
So here you get them as one.
Yeah.
You could get them as one also.
Yeah. But
What's the difference?
Sorry?
I don't get what's the difference, why it can't be, why it's one in the example and this is not.
To me, the difference is that if you really go into the big unbundle and assume that it is 3 different businesses, then you have to make sure that each of these businesses have a business model and a value proposition for each of the customers. And that might be a good idea in some senses if the dynamics, if the business model and the way the resources you organize are very different. That's the idea of unbundling, that they're very different, so we should manage them differently. So the infrastructure, you have to have engineers, you have to have these things going on. But the content, that's a different group of people that you have to work together. And then you have to make a deal between these things. And the question is, should that be 3 different deals for the customer, or should it be connected? I'm arguing that it might not always be a good idea to unbundle. I think there's a difference between the things. So, let's take it in the break as well, because there might be some differences I'm missing with you. The last one here is that you have an open part of your business. That is, you allow customers or you allow partners to be part of the innovation model. Usually what we say that, in the old days at least, we said, well, innovation and coming up with new products and ideas, that happens in our company. It's our ideas. We make the patents. We make sure that nothing in this end is open. So that's closed. But what they argue is that there might actually be a huge benefit from opening up innovation. There might be customers, there might be interest groups that have knowledge that you can use. They modify their products, they come up with good ideas. Get those ideas, scoop them up, get them into the company, make a platform where they can come up with their ideas and get that into developing new products. Yep.
So, in the business model generation book, it mentions incentive as a way of an open business model, where you basically, for anyone who don't remember, that a company can propose some challenges and then people can browse the incentive website and then can solve these challenges and get cash. So my question is, how is that actually different from just outsourcing parts of your business?
It's a way of outsourcing. But the idea of outsourcing is that you made a contractual relationship with a company who just performs this function. So the variety of ideas you get in from having a platform of users that come up with ideas is probably going to be bigger. The quality of the idea might not be each of them as high. So it's two different approaches to outsourcing. But you could also say you go out and approach a crowd instead, so you might get a bigger variation. But there is no initial contractual relation to all these guys. So, having a business model, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's something around. So there's market forces, there's industry forces, there's some trends that's going on, and there's also some macroeconomic forces, the big things. Oh, we're going to have a war soon, so something's going to happen. Oh, we're going to have a new president who seems to align with one of our old dictators in Europe. Well, but the thing is that when you do the market analysis, we simply look at what's going on in the market. What are the market issues? Where are the market heading? What do people want? And we might even go into segmenting the market. And market segmenting is basically taking a group of customers based on similar preferences and group them together. So we have someone who is interested in high-end whatnot. We have someone who has a similar age group, which makes them very preferable to buying diapers, whatever. Something that sort of characterizes a specific customer group. And that makes it easier for us to target them. What are the needs? What are the demand? What are the switching costs? Switching costs is actually quite an interesting thing. Years ago, I got an iPhone. I didn't think much about it until I started installing apps. And I actually have a preference for Android and some of the other phones, but now I've sort of grown into this system, this way of working with the phone, these different applications. So not only do I have a financial investment in a number of applications that I use, but I also have a behavior and a way of working invested in that. That means that the switching cost for another system to me is very high. The same goes if I were to switch from,
A really recent example here in Denmark about switching costs.
Yeah.
It's the bank loans on houses where they lowered the switching costs so they can move the market from one place to another. So that's a really situation.
It's a good thing to look at the switching costs. And it's a way to manipulate the market. And the bank loans are a very interesting example. I have one and I feel screwed. And are the revenue attractive? Do we make money on this? A lot of people went into the telephone market thinking, wow, there might be a lot of money to be made on smartphones. And currently, Apple is one who's really making a profit, and someone else is not making the same profit. Because that part of the market, there's a different type of competition. So, what are the revenues? Another way is to look at the competitive advantage. These are Porter's 5 forces. Who are the competitors? Are there sort of rivalry in the industry? If you look at the airline industry, there are rivals all over the place. And everyone is trying to undercut each other. Sell the seat for the cheapest price. But what are the risk of new entrants? In the airline industry, it's not that high. There were a few years ago where we had some new airlines coming in. nothing really happens. I'm not sure if I want to invest a lot of money. I think, well, airline's probably the place to invest. Not likely. Are there substitute products and services? Could be. We have different means of transportation. Is there other places, other things that people could do? That's what we look at when we look at an industry. Also the suppliers. We have a supply chain, but do they have power? If we have one of those suppliers which sits on 80% of the market for rare earthly minerals, that puts me at a distinct disadvantage. Apple is very clear on this about the suppliers. So every time they buy something, they make sure that they have at least 2 big suppliers, perhaps 3 for screens or memory components, and they can play these 2 suppliers against each other so they make sure that they get not a super profit. Of course, they have to make money because they use them over time, but having 2 suppliers make sure that they can play them against each other. And who are the stakeholders? There are customers, there are other stakeholders in a market. What do they do? Do they have power? Can they do something? Are the customers able to group into one big coalition? Or are they just individuals that we can manipulate? Of course, there's foresight, key trends. What's going on in the future? There might be new technologies. There might be regulatory trends. EU sometimes plays a role in these regulatory trends. What type of information can you gather from your customers? Perhaps societal changes. These are the things that we look for. Are there places where we can go and sell this stuff because they change their behavior? Of course, socioeconomics, meaning that we have a group of people that change their relative income, so now they suddenly have more buying power. Perhaps we should focus on them, people going from lower class to middle class or perhaps higher up. They tend to drag some of their interests and just pay more for it. Let's focus on them. And of course, the macroeconomics. Now we're back to the banking sector. Are there market conditions, local or global, that changes the way that we should actually look at the competition? For instance, capital markets. A few years ago, it wasn't that the market was really bad, but the financial market was bad. You couldn't loan any money. Same problem still exists in Denmark. If you're an industrial company, you want to make a loan and buy some new production system, it's very difficult to get funding in Denmark. Banks are not sort of all loaning out money. We don't like that. It's too risky. So it's difficult to get funding to new production systems in Denmark, and it's actually a structural problem. And in particular, if you're living sort of out in the sticks, not in Copenhagen, it's even more difficult to get money to finance upstarts or startups. So there are these structures, and you have to be aware of them. It's very simple. And
Would you elaborate on these economic infrastructures? Because I have a hard time getting the clue of what it's meant by, how big is the public service and infrastructure in an economical way? What's meant by that?
In Denmark, we have extremely well-functioning economic infrastructure. You can go down to a bank, you can transfer money. If you go to a third world country, it might not be easy to transfer money. You might have to have simple physical money. The tax system, it's difficult to pay your taxes. You cannot do it online. You have to make sure that you have resources that can go down in a secure car, pay your tax. All these things that make sure that society as ours is functioning well. But if we move outside our country, there are differences. Yeah.
Does that also include, just to make it more clear, let's say if I'm going into a country and then if I'm Amazon, I need to be making sure that there is enough logistics support that I can get to get my products to the customers. That kind of also is coming under economic infrastructure, does it?
It's not really what's meant, but it's part of it, because if I don't have the physical infrastructure, then it's very difficult to actually also deliver the goods and services. At least it requires me to think differently. I'm not going to use my little drones or my cars or whatever infrastructure I have now. I have to rely on the local means of transportation.
This is just completely based on the finance rather than not really physical.
Mainly the financial issues. Yeah. So, and again, we have the SWOT analysis. When we looked at the business model, we can go back and see, well, what are the strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are the opportunities based on our internal and external factors? Are they helpful? Are they harmful? Be careful. Sometimes there are some external threats, and they map onto our internal weaknesses, and then we should really look up. So, our time is running fastly. So why should we develop a business model? Of course, it's to make money. There are basically 4 objectives that we look at. We need to satisfy existing needs. That's sort of the basic. People need to get food in their mouth. But we might also want to bring new technologies. We come up with this nice thing, and we can actually sell it. And we can improve and disrupt, and sometimes we like to disrupt market. Apple is one of the few that sort of come up with number 4, create an entirely new market. First they made the smartphone, then they made the tablet computer. New markets. And they get money from us that we can't spend on anywhere else, and suddenly they create a new market. It's exceedingly nice to be able to do that. I'm not sure that many others have done that. And then there's 4 motivations. You can actually almost look at it as a continuum. It's not nice to be reactive. Reactive means that someone else is doing things in the market and you have to play catch up. Oh, goddamn, they lowered their prices again. Oh, I have to do that. So you're at a disadvantage when you're being reactive all the time. In the other end of the scale, you're proactive. I see the things, I see the opportunity, so I go out and make the changes in the market, and I let the other guys be reactive. And in between, there's adaptive, where you sort of adjust and improve your business model, or expansive. Launch new technologies, but you still use the existing business model. But reactive that's kind of being at the disadvantage here. Yeah. Yeah, elaborate.
No, I was thinking we have Danske Bank as one of our cases next week. And if
you have shares.
Sorry?
You have shares in Danske Bank.
Oh. Yeah, I have connections, you can say. No, just to say that if you look at the mobile pay, basically there was a small group of people in Danske Bank. They got 300,000 for a while to develop a new service, and they came up with mobile pay. And I guess, how many of you have mobile pay? Yeah. How many of you have SWIP? Very few. So that's what happened. They developed their own app, their own service, and then the others had to follow.
Yeah, that's being proactive. So every time we have to implement something, the STAR model comes up. That's the tool we have in this course to understand how to implement. And it's basically 5 dimensions in the STAR: strategy, structure, processes, reward system, and people practices. But the idea is it's an alignment model. So if you pull in any of these corners, if you change anything, just a small thing, then it influences the other parts of the system. And that's the idea behind the STAR model. When you change something, it influences all over the place, and it's your job to come up with what's going on and how should I change the other things. And that sort of directs the behavior, and it gives you performance, and it changes the culture. So the strategy thing is, be aware. Business model is how we make money. It's just model for making cash. A strategy, that's a model for the desired performance. DTU has a business model of making money on students, but the strategy is to be top performers in research and top performers in education, and that is going to drive the business model. So it's not the same thing. It's 2 different things. It's just to make that clear. This is the balance. We balance between something externally happening, which we talked about being reactive before, and what's going on internally. If something happens externally, we need to respond to events. It takes energy, it takes resources to respond to external events. So if you're always reactive, you're again at a disadvantage because you're always adapting to outside changes. It means that you might not be able to stabilize your internal processes. And it's quite important that you also focus on your internal processes. There is a need to improve operations besides just looking what's going on outside the company. We make changes, we improve processes, we increase productivity, and that's going on inside the company. That also maps onto our ability to make money outside the company. But it's a balance. You can't do just one thing. You can't just focus on internal issues and say, well, nothing goes on outside our company. We live in a vacuum. It's very nice. There's going to be changes in the market. There's going to be something going on, and you need to respond to that. Just make sure that there's a balance. Don't focus on just one of the sides. And there's four steps in this organizational change process. There is a need for change. Houston, we have a problem. Recognize that there is a problem. And then what should we do? Analyze, decide, what is the future? Where do we want to go? And identify what are the obstacles. Look at the options. And then when you make the decision, go ahead and implement. It sounds so simple, right? Reality is that it's quite difficult because we're always dealing with people. But decide what changes is going to happen and how they're going to be done. So you introduce these changes, you manage them, you try to be a leader, you try to change things, you try to make the changes happen. Simply change people's behavior. And if you know how difficult it is to change your own behavior, then you multiply with an organization, then you sort of get an idea of the problems of changing an organization. It's so much fun, but it's always a bit frustrating. And then afterwards, you evaluate the change, if anything happened. I've been in a few change processes where we measured before and after, and we said, wow, we thought a lot was going on, a lot happened. We couldn't measure any change. We know that something had been going on, but none of the changes that were going on were related to our project. Big nose. Not good. Still got our money though. Sorry. Then it's about structure. Basically, we think about you can have pure functional structure or you can have pure organizational structure and anything in between. It sort of depends on what are the products, what are the organization of the company, what do you actually want to achieve. If you're an engineering company, then pure product project organization is really a good thing. If you're a production company who has specific and very good functions, then a pure function organization is a good thing. But it's not easy to say which is the best thing. There's not, in this situation, you should do particularly that. There's always pros and cons. And that's where we come in as engineers, try to analyze the situation and come up with, oh, it's going to be like that. But there are these basic options. We can make our units based on knowledge, or we could use geography or based on time. At a place like DTU, we usually had things based on geography. So we're in a building, we were an institute, a department, and we had economic support, which was hired by us. We could go down the hallway and say, well, something is wrong in this accounting, could you look at it? So the idea came from the management saying that, well, perhaps we should group based on knowledge and skills. So all financial employees were sort of sucked out of the department and put into a single department for themselves. So now they're a business unit for themselves and they service the departments at DTU. The good thing for them is that suddenly they're in a room full of people who think like themselves. And they get better at what they do because they have a lot of competence. The bad thing is that we have to interact with that unit. And they're getting increasingly more autistic in the sense that they get wrapped around their own way of thinking about project economics. And we have to hire people who know about economics. You see the problem here? We can't get the support we used to get. And the logic is that we're based on knowledge and skill in one place, and we can't use that. So there's a big trade-off. In one end of the system, they think it's better. We that are actually using the system, we think it's a lot worse. So when you look at an organization, should you group on function, skill? What is the best option? There's no right answer. Yeah?
Can you give an example on grouping based on time?
Based on time? Based on, for instance, the time you meet in, you have night shift, you have day shift. That's one way of looking at time. You had a quick
That was the same question.
So, sources of power. That's the way we make things happen. Of course, you have coercive power. That is because I'm a bully, I'm able to change things around me. I'm able to make people change their behavior. But there's about information. Some of you might have been in a meeting, and there were a few guys who had that latest memo which you didn't get. And the discussion takes a wrong turn and you're not part of it. So someone has power based on information. Yeah.
If I don't remember totally incorrect, then this model here has a bit more inputs to power than the contemporary management book has.
Yeah.
So, like, which model should we focus on? Is this model or is the model in the book? And I know it's like reoccurring for you guys that the question's coming up, but there is a lot of models which has inconsistencies to the model in the books.
Yeah. Regarding this one, this is the one you use. If there's a question regarding power, this is the one you use.
That's a short answer. Then there's management of rewards. That is, who gets the bonus, who gets rewarded for doing things. And that might also have a personal issue. Connectional power. Do you have connections to someone who can actually influence stuff? Expert power. That's what we often use as engineers. I'm the expert on this. I can just say that that's the way things have to be. I don't even have to argue because I'm the expert. If you meet old professors, it's so annoying. They feel that they're so above everything they don't have to even argue, even though it's completely rubbish what comes out. And that's also ties in something about culture. Oh, then there's reference power. Who are your references? Who do you work with in the organization? Of course, legitimate power. You have a position of power in your organization, so you use this legitimate power. But there's also sources of conflict, which are quite interesting. We have this incompatible goals and time horizon. There's an example here recently about the exam. We have the student administration, and we have us. There's a conflict, and that's basically because we have different goals. We just want to execute the exam. We don't really care about student complaints because that goes through 101. They care a lot about student complaints. Of course, in the end, we do care about student complaints, but we have different goals here. We want to execute and use the best possible location, but they have to balance needs from other departments. So we can't get these big rooms that we want to use on a Wednesday. So there are a bit different goals, and that's a source of conflict. There's overlapping authority. If you have an organization which have a line structure and product structure, then suddenly you have people who are subject to overlapping authority. It's difficult to work with. Is something going on there?
If I can comment on that one, now that you want to use the exam as an example.
It says wait.
You could also say that it's because of scarce resources, that we actually, as you know, being asked every year to cut down our costs. And that goes for every department, whether it's administration or whether it's in teaching and research. So this is also an example of how this conflict came up, that we were asked to reduce the cost of TEMO, and that applied that we would have a different exam form, or the format, and we then needed a place where we could have you all together at the same time. And DTU doesn't have that, and they don't want to open up the big halls in 101, because that's going to cost them, and this is not part of their service. So that's why the Sunday was offered to us. So I think you can say that's another example of how a conflict arises, that the resources are scarce, and then we have a conflict that we need to solve. But I'll get back to you how we solved it when Kasper is done.
The projectors seem to have crapped up. So, of course, you can see it on your streams. It doesn't really help me a lot. Should we take a 5-minute break and hope that thing, it says warming up right now? But I don't see any light coming up. Pathetic.